The satellite feed flickered once, then stabilized into a nightmare. 16 green dots, call signs Viper 3 through Viper 18, blinked frantically across the Afghan ridgeline, surrounded by a crimson wash of estimated enemy positions. The operations center at Bagram went silent. Colonel Marks leaned forward, his knuckles white against the edge of the display table, watching the numerical readout in the corner. 4 minutes of ammunition remaining for the ground unit. Maybe less. The Taliban had them in a horseshoe ambush. Textbook tactics executed with brutal precision in the Tangi Valley, and the quick reaction force was still 19 minutes out. Predator drones overhead had already expended their Hellfire loadout an hour earlier on a convoy interdiction 30 clicks north. The F-16 scrambled from Kandahar were bingo fuel, their pilots' frustrated voices crackling through speakers as they peeled off back to base. Mark straightened, his jaw working against words he didn't want to say. Someone had to say it. "They're not going to make it," the intelligence officer whispered, a captain whose name nobody would remember after tonight. The room felt smaller. 16 men, most of them younger than 25, pinned against a rock face with limited cover and dwindling options. The radio chatter from Viper 3 Actual came through in controlled bursts, the squad leader's voice tight but professional, calling coordinates, confirming casualties, requesting immediate close air support with the kind of calm that only comes from knowing you're already dead. 3 wounded, 1 critical, ammunition down to final magazines. Then a different voice cut through the channel, a woman's voice, flat and cert. Bagram Control, Hog 2-1 currently holding at Point Whiskey, playtime 4-5 mics, full combat load requesting immediate tasking to Viper 3's position. The operations center stirred. Marks frowned at the air controller who was already pulling up the airspace deconfliction display. Hog 2-1, an A-10 Thunderbolt. The controller's face showed confusion, then recognition, then something that looked uncomfortably close to pity. "Sir, that's Kestrel." The nickname hung in the air like smoke. Everyone knew it. Most pretended they didn't. Captain Nix Kestrel Varden had been flying combat sorties in the A-10 since the surge, back when people still believed the Warthog would be retired any year now. She'd been in-country for 4 deployments, more than most pilots twice her age, and she'd earned a reputation that existed somewhere in the gray space between respect and ridicule. They called her Kestrel because she circled. She waited. She watched. And when everyone else had moved on, she was still there, patient and relentless, like the bird of prey that hovered over empty fields waiting for movement in the grass. The air boss, a lieutenant colonel with close-cropped gray hair and a 1,000-yard stare earned over Fallujah, shook his head slowly. "She's been up there for 3 hours already. Training run. She wasn't even supposed to be armed." But the ordnance log on the screen told a different story. Hog 2-1 was carrying a full combat load. 500 rounds of 30mm depleted uranium in the GAU-8 Avenger rotary cannon, 6 AGM-65 Mavericks on the outboard pylons, 2 rocket pods, and a pair of Mark 82 500-pound bombs on the inboards. Training run. Fully armed. Everyone in the room understood what that meant. Kestrel had known. Somehow she'd known. Mark studied the display, weighing options that didn't exist against time that had already run out. Viper 3 Actual's voice came through again, strained now, the professionalism cracking at the edges. "Bagram, we are danger close, taking effective fire from 3 sides, request any available CAS, how copy?" 4 minutes. Maybe 3. Marks reached for the radio handset, his hand steady despite the weight of what he was about to authorize. Hog 2-1 Bagram Control, you are cleared direct to Viper 3's position. Expect troops in contact, danger close, multiple threats acknowledge. The response came immediately. No hesitation, no bravado, just the flat certainty of someone who had already made the decision before anyone else knew there was a choice. Hog 2-1, Roger. Direct Viper 3, playtime sufficient, Winchester loadout, Kestrel's inbound. In the background of her transmission, they could hear it. The low, deep rumble of the A-10's twin General Electric TF-34 turbofans. that distinctive sound like distant thunder rolling across mountains. The Warthog wasn't fast. It wasn't elegant. It was a flying gun with barely enough airplane attached to keep it airborne, designed in the 70s to kill Soviet tanks and somehow still the most terrifying thing on any battlefield. And somewhere over the Hindu Kush, Nix Varden pushed the throttles forward and turned south toward the valley where 16 men were counting their last rounds. The operations center watched the blue friendly icon marked Hog 2-1 begin its track toward the crimson mass of enemy contacts. Nobody said what they were all thinking. Kestrel had always been the pilot they called when nothing else was available. The backup, the afterthought. The one who flew the missions nobody wanted, logged the hours nobody cared about, and went home alone to a CHU container housing unit while everyone else hit the bar. She'd requested combat duty 7 times, been denied 6. The Air Force had studies, statistics, risk assessment matrices about women in frontline aircraft, about A-10 pilots and stress loads and acceptable loss ratios. Nix Varden had stopped caring about acceptable years ago. She'd flown medevac cover in Helmand Province when the dust-off birds couldn't get through. She dropped danger-close ordnance on a Taliban assault in the Korangal when an entire fire base was about to be overrun. She'd loitered over convoys for hours, burning fuel and patience just in case. Just in case turned out to be most of the war. And every time the same response from command. Good job, solid flying. Maybe tone it down, stay in your lane. The lane was supposed to be armed reconnaissance. Show of force. Deliver some gun runs, drop some bombs from altitude, let the fast movers handle the real work. Kestrel didn't do lanes. She did circles. Over Viper 3's position, the Taliban had committed at least 80 fighters, maybe more, using the terrain like a textbook. High ground, interlocking fields of fire, RPGs positioned to deny air support. They'd done this before. The valley was a kill box and they knew every angle. They'd studied American tactics, learned the timing of air support, understood that close air support usually meant fast jets that couldn't see through the dust and couldn't stay long enough to matter. They hadn't planned for an A-10. They definitely hadn't planned for Kestrel. Nix checked her kneeboard, cross-referenced the coordinates Viper 3 had transmitted, and banked the Thunderbolt into a shallow descending turn. Below her, the ridgeline looked peaceful in the late afternoon sun, all browns and grays in the dark green patches where snowmelt fed stubborn vegetation. Beautiful in the way that places designed for killing often were. She toggled the radio. Viper 3 actual, Hog 2-1, I have your position, coming in from the northwest, talk me onto target. The squad leader's voice came back fast, clipped, the sound of gunfire loud behind his words. Hog 2-1, we are pressed against the eastern rock face, taking fire from ridgeline west and north, RPGs from the southern draw, danger close on all sides, how copy? Nix's eyes tracked across the landscape, building the tactical picture in her mind. The Warthog's glass cockpit displayed targeting data, but she'd learned years ago to trust what she saw more than what the computers told her. Good copy, Viper 3, I need you to mark your position, infrared strobe, acknowledge. A pause then. Hog, we popped that strobe, they're going to know exactly where we are. Nix's voice didn't change, still flat, still certain. They already know exactly where you are. Pop the strobe. Another pause, shorter. Strobing now. Through her targeting pod display, the infrared marker appeared. A bright pulsing star against the gray rock face, and clustered around it, the heat signatures of 16 men pressed into whatever cover the terrain offered. And everywhere else, movement. Dozens of heat signatures, dispersing, flanking, advancing with the patience of fighters who knew they had time on their side. Nix armed the GAU-8, felt the slight vibration through the control stick as the 7-barrel rotary cannon went hot. 30mm, depleted uranium, 70 rounds per second. The A-10 didn't carry the gun. The A-10 was the gun. Everything else was just there to get the gun where it needed to be. She rolled inverted, pulled the nose down, let the Warthog slide into the kind of dive that would tear the wings off anything faster or prettier, and lined up on the western ridgeline where muzzle flashes flickered like fireflies in the fading light. Viper 3, Hog 2-1 is in hot, West Ridge, 30 Mike, break, all Viper elements heads down now. The trigger was smooth under her finger. She squeezed, and the universe split open with a sound like ripping canvas amplified through a speaker made of rage. BRRRRRRRT. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon roared, and 30mm rounds chewed through rock and earth and flesh at 4,000 feet per second, each projectile carrying more kinetic energy than a freight train compressed into a titanium dart the size of a beer bottle. The western ridgeline erupted. Dust, rock fragments, and things that had been fighters a second ago scattered across the slope in a diagonal line of destruction that was as precise as it was apocalyptic. Nix held the trigger for 3 seconds, 210 rounds, then pulled off, banking hard, climbing, scanning for threats. AAA RPGs, anything that might reach up and end her day. The radio crackled. Viper 3's voice higher now, shocked. Good hits. Western Ridge is suppressed, say again, Western Ridge is suppressed. But Nix was already lining up the next run. The northern ridgeline, more heat signatures, more muzzle flashes. They were shooting at her now, small arms fire that couldn't touch the A-10's titanium bathtub cockpit but showed her exactly where they were. Rookie mistake. Never shoot at the warthog. It just makes her curious. She came in lower this time, 50 feet off the deck, the Thunderbolt's gray-green camouflage blending into the mountain terrain, and lit up the northern position with another 3-second burst. The sound echoed across the valley, bouncing off rock faces, a deep tearing roar that every grunt who'd ever served in Afghanistan knew meant salvation was inbound. The northern ridge went quiet, not suppressed, silent. Nix pulled up, checked her fuel, checked her ammo counter. 4,000 rounds remaining. Plenty. She toggled back to Viper 3's frequency. Viper 3, Hog 2-1, northern ridge is neutralized, but I'm seeing heavy concentration in the southern draw, approximately 60 meters from your position. How copy? The squad leader's response was tight, controlled, but underneath it something new. Hope. Roger, Hog, southern draw is correct. They're massing for an assault. We have wounded who can't move. Request immediate. He didn't finish. Nix understood. Danger close didn't cover it. The enemy was close enough that the 30mm would be hitting within meters of friendly positions. Close enough that if she missed, if she pulled the trigger a half-second too late, or misjudged the angle by a single degree, she'd kill the men she was trying to save. This was the moment the textbooks warned about. The moment commanders made careers avoiding. The moment that ended with congressional inquiries and safety reviews, and somebody's name attached to a new regulation about acceptable risk parameters. Nix Kestrel Varden, who'd been told she was too aggressive, too reckless, too willing to push the envelope, stared down at the thermal display and did the math in her head. 60 meters, troops in contact, danger close. She'd done closer. Her father had flown A-1 Sky Raiders in Vietnam, back when close air support meant propeller-driven attack planes and eyeball navigation. He'd told her stories, late at night when the nightmares woke him up, and the only thing that helped was talking about the missions that mattered. About the time he'd put napalm 30 meters from a special forces compound, because 30 meters was all the buffer they had. About the Medal of Honor citation he'd turned down because medals didn't bring back the ARVN troops who died while he was refueling. About how the only thing that mattered in the cockpit wasn't the regulations or the risk assessments or the career implications. It was the men on the ground who needed you right now. He died when Nix was 17. Pancreatic cancer, 3 months from diagnosis to funeral. Never got to see her pin on her wings. Never got to see her climb into the cockpit of an A-10 and become the thing he'd spent his whole life being. But he taught her the only lesson that mattered. When someone's dying and you can do something about it, you do something about it. Everything else is just noise. Nix rolled the warthog inverted again, pulled the nose down until the targeting pipper was kissing the southern draw, and toggled the radio one more time. Viper 3, Hog 2-1, I need every man flat on the ground, faces in the dirt, hands over heads, acknowledge immediately. Hog, we copy, going prone now. All Viper elements get down, get down. She could hear them shouting in the background. the controlled panic of men who understood what was about to happen and had exactly zero choice about it. Nix watched the thermal display, watched the friendly signatures drop flat against the rock, watched the enemy signatures in the draw continue moving forward, oblivious or committed or both. 60 meters. She exhaled slowly, let her heartbeat settle, felt the warthog respond to her hands like an extension of her own nervous system. This wasn't her first danger-close engagement. It wouldn't be her last, but every time felt like the first time. Every time carried the weight of knowing that inches mattered, that milliseconds were the difference between salvation and catastrophe. The trigger waited under her finger. She squeezed, and the GAU-8 spoke its final argument, and the southern draw ceased to exist as a tactical position. The rounds walked through earth and rock and flesh with the precision of a surgical laser, guided by the hand of something ancient and merciless. Nix held the trigger for 2 seconds, adjusted her angle microscopically, held it for 2 more. When she pulled off and climbed, there was nothing moving in the southern draw except dust settling through the late afternoon light. The radio was silent for 5 seconds, 10. Then Viper 3's voice shaking now, the professional control completely gone. Hog 2-1, Jesus Christ. Direct hits, southern draw is eliminated, say again, eliminated, no movement, no fire, how the hell did you? Nix cut him off, her voice still flat. Viper 3, continue defensive positions, I'm making another pass for BDA, then we'll talk extract. Battle damage assessment, the boring part. She circled the valley, checking her work, scanning for secondary threats, waiting for someone to be dumb enough to shoot at her again. Nobody was that dumb. Below, the ridgelines and draws were quiet except for the heat signatures of men who would never move again. 16 green dots on the operations center display, still blinking, still alive. In Bagram, Colonel Mark stared at the screen, at the blue icon marked Hog 2-1 making lazy figure eights over the valley, and tried to think of something appropriate to say. The intelligence captain beat him to it, his voice quiet but carrying across the silent ops center. Sir, she just saved all of them. Marks nodded slowly. He'd known Kestrel's reputation. Everyone did, too aggressive, pushes too hard, doesn't play well with others, doesn't respect the chain of command. Flies like she's got nothing to lose. Watching the display, watching that blue icon circle protectively over 16 men who were alive because someone had been willing to do the thing everyone else said was impossible, Marks realized something. Maybe flying like you had nothing to lose was exactly what you needed when everyone else had already given up. He keyed the radio. Hog 2-1, Bagram Control, outstanding work. QRF is now 15 mics out. Maintain top cover until relief on station. Nix's response was immediate, professional, empty of anything that might be mistaken for pride. Bagram, Hog 2-1, Roger, maintaining top cover, playtime now 30 mics. 30 minutes. Enough. More than enough. She'd stay until the quick reaction force arrived, make sure nobody tried anything stupid, then head back to Bagram and file the mission report that nobody would read carefully and everybody would initial anyway because that's how it worked. Another day. Another mission. Another valley where mathematics and violence intersected at precisely the right moment to mean something. Below her, Viper 3 Actual was coordinating with his squad, checking casualties, redistributing ammunition, preparing for extraction. His voice came back on the radio, uncertain now, like he was asking a question he didn't know how to phrase. Hog 2-1, Viper 3, we owe you, all of us. What's your name, your actual name? Nix hesitated. The question hung in the cockpit, surrounded by the steady rumble of the turbofans and the faint hiss of the radio, and the silence that came after people asked questions that mattered. Names were supposed to be unimportant in combat. Call signs, unit designators, grid coordinates, those were the things that mattered. Names were for after-action reports and award citations and memorial services. But sometimes, in the space between survival and death, names meant something again. Viper 3, Hog 2-1, call sign is Kestrel, actual name is Varden, Captain Nix Varden, pleasure doing business. Another pause, then Viper 3's voice, rough with something that might have been emotion or dust or the aftermath of believing you were dead and discovering you weren't. "Captain Varden, Viper 3, we won't forget this. Won't forget you." Nix didn't respond. There wasn't anything to say. She banked the Warthog into another lazy circle, checked her fuel state, watched the sun drop toward the western peaks, and waited for the cavalry to arrive so she could go home. In the operations center, Colonel Marks was already composing the after-action report in his head, thinking about the conversation he'd need to have with the air boss, with the wing commander, with everyone who'd ever questioned whether Kestrel belonged in combat or whether the A-10 still had a place in modern warfare. The Quick Reaction Force arrived 14 minutes later, 3 Blackhawks loaded with Rangers who fast-roped into the valley and set up a perimeter while the wounded were loaded, and the squad extracted under cover of rotor wash and the last light of day. Nix watched from above, circling, always circling, until the last helicopter lifted off and turned northeast toward Bagram and safety. Only then did she break station, point the Warthog's nose north, and begin the flight home. The turbofans hummed their steady song. The cockpit was warm despite the altitude, insulated against the cold outside, a small pressurized bubble of life moving through thin air and thinner light. She didn't think about the mission, didn't replay the gun runs or second-guess the angles or wonder about the men whose heat signatures had vanished from her targeting display. That came later, in the dark hours before dawn when sleep was impossible and the past had nothing better to do than visit. For now, she flew. Hands on the stick, eyes on the instruments, mind empty of everything except the immediate present and the mathematical certainty that fuel plus distance plus airspeed equaled home. The radio crackled. "Hog 21 Bagram Tower, you are cleared direct. Straighten approach runway 21, winds calm, altimeter 3015, contact ground point 9er after landing." She acknowledged, began her descent, watched the lights of Bagram Air Base resolve out of the darkness ahead. The landing was smooth, professional, unremarkable. She taxied to the A-10 revetments, shut down the engines, ran through the post-flight checklist with the same methodical attention she gave everything else. The crew chief was waiting when she climbed down from the cockpit, a technical sergeant with grease under his fingernails and 20 years of keeping Warthogs flying. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite parse. "Ma'am, Ops Center called down, said to tell you good work tonight. Said it was." He trailed off, searching for words that didn't exist in the technical orders. "Said it was something special." Nix nodded, gathered her kneeboard and helmet bag, and headed toward the operations building where the paperwork waited. "Something special. That's what they always said, right before they told you to tone it down." The debrief took an hour. Intelligence wanted grid coordinates, ordnance expenditure, confirmed kills, collateral damage assessments. The air boss wanted to know why she'd been carrying a full combat load on a training flight. The ops officer wanted to know why she hadn't requested permission before engaging danger close. Nix answered every question with the flat professional courtesy that had carried her through 4 deployments and 7 requests for combat duty and 6 denials and 1,000 casual dismissals. "Yes, sir. No, sir. Tactical judgment. Time-sensitive target within standing row. No collateral. No friendly fire. Mission success." The words were easy. They always were. It was the space between the words that carried the weight. When the debrief ended and she walked out into the night air, the base was quiet except for the distant rumble of jets taking off for night missions, and the closer hum of generators powering the forward operating base that never slept. She walked to her CHU, a shipping container converted into living quarters with a cot and a wall locker, and a picture of her father in his flight suit, young and serious and dead for 15 years. Nix sat on the cot, unlaced her boots, and let the silence settle around her like dust. Tomorrow there would be another mission, another valley, another frequency where someone would call for help and she would answer because that's what she did. That's what her father had done. That's what the A-10 was built for, to be there when everything else had failed, to fly low and slow and ugly into the places where precision and speed didn't matter nearly as much as commitment and firepower and the willingness to stay. She lay back, closed her eyes, and listened to the sounds of the base at night. Somewhere out there, 16 men were drinking coffee and cleaning weapons, and telling the story of the A-10 pilot who'd pulled them out of hell with danger-close gun runs and impossible precision. They'd get the names wrong, embellish the details, turn it into the kind of story that grew with each retelling until the truth was buried under layers of legend. That was fine. Nix didn't need the story. She just needed to fly. The next morning, Colonel Marks called her to his office. She stood at attention in front of his desk while he studied a folder that she knew contained her personnel file, and probably the after-action report from the previous night, and definitely a letter of counseling about unauthorized combat loads on training flights. Marks looked up, his expression unreadable. "Captain Varden, I've been reviewing your record. 4 deployments, 1,700 combat hours in the A-10, 47 close air support missions, 0 incidents, 0 complaints from ground commanders. Your efficiency reports are solid. Your tactical judgment is sound." He paused, let the words hang. "And you're one of the most difficult pilots to command in this entire air wing." Nix said nothing. There was nothing to say that wouldn't make it worse. Marks leaned back, still watching her. "You don't follow procedures, you push boundaries. You make decisions that should require 3 levels of approval, and you make them in real time without asking permission. You fly missions that nobody authorized, you carry ordnance that isn't on the flight plan, and you engage targets in situations where any reasonable pilot would break off and request guidance." He opened the folder, flipped through several pages, stopped at one. "Last night, Viper 3's squad leader filed a combat recommendation. Says you saved 16 lives with flying that he's never seen before and hopes to never see again, because it was simultaneously the most professional and most terrifying thing that's ever happened to him." His exact words. Marks closed the folder, met her eyes. "The air boss wants to ground you pending investigation. The wing commander wants to reprimand you for unauthorized combat loads. The safety officer wants to review your tactical decisions for rules of engagement violations. And every single man in Viper 3's squad wants to buy you a beer and give you a medal." Nix stood silent, waiting for the other shoe to drop. It always did. Good job, but outstanding flying, however. Solid work, nevertheless. The buts and howevers and neverthelesses were where careers went to die. Mark stood, walked to the window, looked out at the flight line where A-10s sat in their revetments, ugly and powerful and waiting. "I flew F-16s in Desert Storm," he said quietly. "Fast, clean, precision strikes from altitude. We'd roll in, drop our ordnance, roll out, never even saw the ground troops we were supporting. Clinical, efficient, safe." He turned back to her. "I thought that was the future of air power, speed, precision, standoff capability. Then I came here and watched the A-10 pilots work, and I realized I'd been wrong about what matters." He walked back to the desk, picked up the folder and dropped it in the trash. Nix blinked. Mark smiled, thin and cold. "There's no investigation. There's no reprimand. There's a combat recommendation being forwarded to wing headquarters, and there's a new flight schedule being posted this afternoon that has you leading a 4-ship A-10 package for ground support operations in Helmand Province. Because apparently what we need isn't more pilots who follow procedures. What we need is more pilots who understand that sometimes the book gets rewritten in real time at 500 feet with 16 lives hanging on whether you're willing to do the impossible thing." He sat down, pulled out a new folder, opened it. "You're dismissed, Captain. Try to stay out of trouble, and when you can't, try to save as many people as possible while you're causing it." Nix saluted, turned, walked to the door, stopped. "Sir." Marks looked up. "Thank you, sir," he nodded. "Don't thank me. Thank Viper 3. They're the ones who made enough noise that I couldn't bury this quietly. Get out of here, Kestrel. You've got a mission brief in 3 hours." She left, walked across the compound, felt the morning sun warm on her face and the weight of the folder being thrown in the trash lighter than it had any right to be. 4 deployments, 7 requests, 6 denials. And now, finally, the thing she'd been asking for since she'd pinned on her wings. Not permission, not approval. Just acknowledgement that sometimes the person who'd been circling patiently in the background was exactly the person you needed when everything went wrong. 3 hours later, she was sitting in the mission brief with 3 other A-10 pilots, all of them older, all of them with more time in command, all of them watching her with expressions that ranged from curiosity to skepticism to poorly concealed resentment. The operations officer ran through the brief. Helmand Province, Marine unit in sustained contact, multiple enemy positions, high casualty risk, complex terrain, expected duration 4 hours, expected difficulty extreme. Captain Varden will be mission lead, the ops officer said, and the room went very quiet. One of the pilots, a major with a call sign that translated to 15 years of flying fighters before transitioning to the Warthog, raised his hand. "Sir, no disrespect, but Kestrel's never led a package before. This is a complex mission. Shouldn't we have someone with more command experience?" The ops officer looked at Marks, who'd stepped into the briefing room without anyone noticing. Marks looked at the major, then at Nix, then back at the major. "Major, how many danger-close gun runs have you flown in your career?" The major hesitated. "Sir, I don't have exact numbers, but Captain Varden flew 3 yesterday," Marks interrupted. "In 15 minutes, in a valley where every other asset had already called Winchester or Bingo fuel, and she brought all 16 ground troops home alive. If you have a problem with her leading this mission, you're welcome to file a formal objection. Otherwise, I suggest you pay attention to the brief and learn something." The major said nothing. Neither did anyone else. Nick studied the map, memorized the coordinates, built the tactical picture in her mind. 4 A-10s, Marine unit in contact, complex terrain, 4 hours, she'd done worse. The mission brief ended. The pilots dispersed to pre-flight. Nix walked to her assigned aircraft, ran through the pre-flight inspection with the crew chief, climbed into the cockpit and strapped in. The GAU-8 sat beneath her, 7 barrels, 4,000 rounds. A weapon designed by people who understood that sometimes subtlety was less important than the ability to delete grid squares from existence. The other 3 A-10s checked in over the radio, their voices professional, neutral, waiting to see what Kestrel would do with mission lead. Nix ran through the startup procedure, felt the turbofan spool up, tested the flight controls, checked the weapons systems. Everything green, everything ready. She toggled the radio, Hog flight check-in, Hog 2, Hog 3, Hog 4. 4 aircraft. 16 lives yesterday. How many today? The tower cleared them for takeoff. Nix released the brakes, rolled forward, felt the Warthog accelerate down the runway with the ponderous inevitability of something that was never meant to be graceful but was always meant to be effective. The nose came up. The wheels left the ground. And Captain Nix Kestrel Varden, daughter of a Skyraider pilot who'd understood what mattered, climbed into the Afghan sky and turned south toward Helmand Province, toward the Marines who needed her, toward the mission that would define whether she was a fluke or the future. Behind her, 3 other A-10s followed, their pilots silent, watching, waiting to see if the legend from last night was real or just another story that would fade when tested against daylight and complexity. Ahead, the mountains rose like broken teeth against the horizon, and somewhere beyond them, men were fighting and dying and calling for help. The radio crackled with coordinates, frequencies, tactical updates. Nix listened, processed, built the picture. 2 Marine squads, Taliban ambush, high ground advantage, multiple casualties, medical evacuation requested but unable to land until the area was secured. The kind of situation that started bad and got worse and ended with names on a memorial wall unless someone intervened. She checked her fuel, checked her ordnance, checked the formation behind her. Hog flight, 4 ships, full combat loads, playtime sufficient. The mathematics were simple. Time plus distance plus firepower equaled possibility. Not certainty, never certainty, but possibility was enough. Hog flight, Kestrel, we're going in low, we're staying until it's done, and we're bringing everyone home. Questions? Silence on the radio. Then Hog 3, the major who'd questioned her leadership, his voice different now. Kestrel, Hog 3, no questions, ready to execute. She smiled, thin and cold, the expression her father used to wear before missions that mattered. Hog flight, Kestrel, let's go to work. The mountains rose ahead. The valley waited. And 4 A-10 Thunderbolts dropped down into the terrain, low and fast and committed, their pilots ready to learn whether Kestrel's circles meant something, or whether yesterday had just been luck. By sunset, everyone would know the answer.